The first time the pregnant mare slipped out of the corral, folks around the ranch brushed it off as bad luck. Animals sometimes got startled by a sudden noise or pushed against a loose board. But when she escaped a second time, and then a third, something about it felt strange enough to unsettle even the calmest workers. No one said it out loud, but everyone felt the same quiet worry growing heavier with each incident. The mare was close to foaling, and she needed rest more than anything. Instead, she kept vanishing into the wide land as if something out there was calling her. Most days on the ranch followed the same rhythm. Chores began before the first light touched the fields. Wagons rolled across the dirt, men hauled feed, and the sound of horses breathing in the cool air settled into the mornings like an old song. Life there wasn't easy, but it was predictable. That predictability was what made the mare's behavior feel so alarming. Animals usually relied on habits and instinct. They didn't wander off without reason, especially not a gentle creature like her. She had always been steady, never skittish, and she trusted people. But lately, anyone who tried to approach her noticed a new tension in her eyes, as if she was torn between staying and running. The ranch owner tried to explain it away. He said she was restless because of the coming birth. He said mares sometimes acted odd near the end. But even he kept checking the fences more than usual, running his hands across the planks, pressing his boots into the dirt to see if there were new tracks. He didn't like being puzzled, and he liked even less the feeling that something was slipping past him. One worker, a quiet man who'd been tending horses since he was young, was the first to notice what others missed. He had a habit of watching animals the way most people watched weather. He paid attention to the small moments, the way ears flicked at distant sounds, how hooves shifted before a horse moved, the tremble of muscles when instinct whispered danger. And what he saw in the mare wasn't fear, it was intention. When she stood near the corral gate, her head always tilted toward the open land as if she recognized something out there, as if she expected something to return. The escapes grew more troubling because each time she fled, she went in the same direction. Not toward the pastures where the other horses grazed, not toward shelter or water. She went toward the back acres where the land opened into long stretches of dry brush and quiet paths hardly anyone walked now. It wasn't the safest place, especially for a mare carrying a foal. The ground was uneven, and old fence posts still littered some areas. Everyone wondered what she was searching for. Nobody could guess. The ranch hands were sent out each time she disappeared. They spread across the land with ropes and lanterns when daylight faded, calling out as they searched through the tall grass and dust. When they finally found her, she never fought, never panicked. She simply stood there as if waiting for them to catch up, as if being found was part of her plan. The men joked nervously that she seemed almost disappointed when they brought her home. Talk around the ranch shifted as the pattern continued. People whispered during meals and paused their work to glance toward her stall. They started paying attention to things they usually ignored: coyotes howling at night, birds scattering all at once, the sense that the wind carried sounds they couldn't quite place, little things that meant nothing on their own but felt different when stacked beside the mare's strange behavior. Even the younger workers, who usually cracked jokes to break tension, grew quieter. They talked about whether someone or something beyond the ranch might be influencing her, but no one had seen intruders or strangers passing through. The roads were empty most days. Travelers rarely came by unless they needed supplies or directions. The ranch owner didn't like rumors spreading. He believed fear made people careless. One morning, he gathered everyone and insisted the mare was only confused or feeling the strain of pregnancy. He said animals sensed storms before they formed and that maybe the weather was shifting. But as he spoke, his eyes drifted toward the corral as if he didn't believe his own explanation. No one challenged him, but the unease lingered like dust in the air. The mare's belly grew heavier, and the workers grew more protective of her. They strengthened the gates, replaced weak boards, and even assigned someone to watch her at night. But no matter what they did, she kept escaping. Once, she managed to slip away even with a worker seated nearby. He swore he only looked down for a moment to adjust his coat, and when he looked up, she was gone. He couldn't explain how she moved so silently or how she slipped through an opening that hadn't been there minutes before. That incident rattled everyone. People began to wonder whether they were dealing with something more than just a restless animal. Even the horses in nearby stalls seemed to notice something. They grew uneasy whenever she approached, shifting their weight and raising their heads high. It was as if they sensed something none of the workers could see. One evening, the quiet horse handler lingered near the mare after the others left. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the barn floor. The mare stood still, ears twitching gently. When he placed his hand on her neck, she didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her head and pressed her muzzle against his shoulder. He whispered to her, trying to understand what she wanted. And though she couldn't speak, something in her posture made him feel she was trying to share something. A warning or a request. He couldn't tell which. The tension around the ranch grew thicker as the days passed. Mysterious tracks began appearing near the back acres. Not animal tracks, not tracks any of them recognized. They looked like something heavy had been dragged across the ground, making uneven marks through the weeds. The men followed the trail once, but it ended near a cluster of old trees. It was as if whatever made the tracks simply vanished. The mare escaped again the day after the tracks were found. This time she seemed determined. She slipped through the corral faster than anyone expected, galloping across the field with a strength that amazed the workers. They chased after her on horseback, but she moved with surprising speed despite her condition. It was as if desperation guided her steps. When they finally found her, she was standing at the edge of the back acres, staring into the old trees like she was waiting for something to emerge. Her breathing was heavy, but she didn't back away. The workers hesitated to approach, sensing the strange stillness in the air. It was the kind of silence that made a person feel watched. The quiet handler stepped forward first. He held his rope loosely, not wanting to frighten her. But as he walked closer, he noticed something held in the shadows behind the trees. Not a movement exactly, more like a shape, something faint, something he couldn't understand. The mare lifted her head, ears pointed sharply toward the dark space. The workers felt their skin prick with tension. No one spoke, no one moved. And then, right before they reached her, the mare took a slow step toward the trees as if she finally sensed the truth waiting there. A truth none of them were prepared to face. The workers stood frozen for a long moment, unsure whether to call out to the mare or step back from the tree line. The quiet handler kept his rope lowered as he watched her posture. Her body trembled, but not in fear. It was something else. Something that made her lean forward as if the answer she had been chasing was finally within reach. The wind pushed softly through the weeds, carrying a faint scent of dust and bark, and something else none of them could place. The mare seemed to recognize it. She breathed in deeply, nostrils flaring, her eyes fixed on the dark between the branches. The handler took one slow step closer. The mare flicked an ear toward him, then back toward the trees. She wasn't trying to flee. She was trying to understand. He could feel her tension through the air, as if she were waiting for permission to move forward. But she stayed rooted in place, hooves firm in the dirt. The others spread out in a loose circle, giving her space while trying to keep her from bolting again. None of them dared to look away from that strange shape behind the trees. When a distant crow called out, the handler finally raised his voice. He spoke softly, urging her to return. She didn't move. Instead, she lowered her head just a little, like she was surrendering to something she could feel, but they could not. The handler reached her side slowly and placed his hand on her neck. Her muscles twitched beneath his fingers. She wasn't afraid of him, yet she remained drawn toward the trees as if an invisible thread pulled her. After a long moment, she allowed herself to be guided back to the ranch. She didn't resist, but she also kept glancing over her shoulder, ears turned toward the woods. Even as the workers walked her home, the strange stillness clung to the air. No one spoke during the return. Every man had the same quiet thought settling like a weight on his chest. Whatever was in those trees had not left, and the mare wasn't done chasing it. The ranch felt different after that day. Work went on as usual, but the mood had shifted. People walked with a kind of alertness, glancing repeatedly toward the back acres. The quiet handler checked the mare more often than before. He noticed she slept less, pacing her stall at night. Her breathing picked up at random moments, as if she heard something no one else did. When other horses around her reacted the same way, he knew something deeper was happening. The ranch owner tried to maintain control. He introduced more rules, assigned extra tasks, and insisted everything was under control, but even he couldn't ignore what happened next. A few mornings later, new tracks appeared near the back acres again. This time they were deeper, more defined, almost like something heavy had pressed into the soil with purpose. The pattern looked deliberate, as if whatever made them had returned to the same place more than once. The workers followed the trail until it faded near the old trees once more. No sign of an animal. No broken branches or footprints. Only that same uneasy silence. Back in the barn, the mare reacted strongly when they returned from the search. She stomped her hooves and swung her head as if sensing the trail on them. When the handler stood near her, she pressed her muzzle against his shoulder again. Her breathing felt unsteady, like she wanted him to understand something but couldn't show him. She kept glancing toward the barn doors, towards the direction of the back acres. The more they watched her, the clearer it became that her escapes weren't accidents. She wasn't confused or frightened. She was determined. The workers started talking more openly now, trying to figure out what she might be searching for or whether something connected to her past was resurfacing. The mare had come to the ranch only a year earlier. Before that, she belonged to a small trading caravan that traveled from town to town. They remembered the day she arrived. She had been thin then, tired and weary, with a coat that needed care and hooves that had gone too long without trimming. The caravan leader at the time claimed she had been difficult to manage since they acquired her, but he never explained where she originally came from. He simply said she needed a quieter life, someplace calmer, and the ranch owner took her in. The more they thought about her past, the more questions surfaced. Had the caravan hidden something? Had she experienced something that still echoed in her memory? Horses didn't forget easily. They remembered danger. They remembered voices, scents, shadows. Something from her old life could have returned. The ranch workers grew more curious about the trading caravan. It hadn't come through the region in months. Some said they had moved farther west. Others claimed the group fell apart after a dispute. No one knew the truth. But the mare acted as if she remembered something none of them did. One evening, after most of the workers had gone home, the handler stayed back again. The barn glowed softly from a lantern hanging near the door. Shadows stretched across the wooden beams, and the mare stood quietly in her stall. He leaned against the gate and watched her chew slowly on hay. Her eyes were alert, though, watching him as if waiting for him to speak. So he did. He talked in a low voice about the tracks, the trees, the strange escape. He didn't expect her to react, but as he spoke, she lifted her head and stepped closer until her muzzle rested gently against the gate. She let out a soft, warm breath, and he wondered if she was trying to comfort him or warn him. The ranch owner stepped in a moment later. He didn't say anything at first. He just studied the mare with a frown. Then he asked the handler what he thought was happening. The handler hesitated. He didn't want to sound foolish, but he couldn't lie either. He said he believed she was searching for something familiar, someone or something from her past. The owner's eyes narrowed. He rubbed his jaw slowly, considering the idea. Then he mentioned something he had never shared before. The day she arrived, the caravan had rushed the paperwork. They didn't seem eager to talk about her. They kept glancing over their shoulders as if they were in a hurry to leave. And when the owner asked about her temperament, they gave short, vague answers. He had dismissed it at the time, but now it felt significant. The owner left the barn with a troubled expression, and the handler stayed a while longer. He watched the mare lower her head and begin pacing again. Something in her steps felt purposeful, like she knew a deadline was approaching. The air outside felt heavier that night. Clouds moved slowly across the sky, dimming the stars. The ranch felt quieter than usual. Even the crickets seemed to soften their song. The next morning brought new tension. When the sun rose, a stranger was seen near the far fence. He didn't come close and didn't speak to anyone. He simply watched the land before disappearing down the road. Some workers shrugged it off as a traveler passing through, but others noticed he kept glancing toward the back acres. And they couldn't shake the feeling that his appearance wasn't random. A stranger showing up right when the mare acted restless again felt like more than coincidence. That same day, the mare grew unsettled, pacing and snorting, refusing to eat. She kept turning toward the barn doors. Every sound outside made her perk up. The workers tried to calm her, but she barely responded. It was as if she felt a shift in the air long before any human could sense it. The handler walked her in a small circle outside the barn to settle her nerves, but even then she kept pulling gently toward the trees. She wasn't trying to bolt. She was trying to guide him. And when she suddenly slowed and stared across the field, a chill ran down his arms. She stared with a focus he had seen before, the kind that meant something was out there. When he followed her line of sight, he saw nothing at first, only tall grass moving with the wind. But then he realized the grass wasn't moving evenly. Something had brushed through it, something large enough to leave a faint path. The same kind of trail they had been finding near the back acres. He tightened his grip on the lead rope. The mare breathed heavily, her body leaning forward, her ears locked on the path. She knew it was the same presence that had visited before. The handler called the others, and within minutes they gathered near the fence. They followed the fresh trail until they reached the same old trees. But this time the tracks didn't stop. They curved deeper into the cluster of trees, leading toward a part of the land they hadn't searched yet. No one wanted to admit it, but the thought crossed all their minds. Whatever was leaving those tracks had returned for a reason, and the mare seemed to understand that reason more than any of them. She stood quietly behind the group, watching the trees with a steady, unwavering gaze. They stepped toward the dark path slowly, not sure what waited beyond the shadows. The air felt thick and the silence pressed against their ears. The mare's tail swished once. Her muscles tightened. Something was in those trees. Something connected to her past. Something she had been trying to reach all along. And none of them were prepared for what they were about to uncover. The men stood at the edge of the tree line longer than any of them expected, each waiting for another to take the first step. The trail was clear enough to follow, yet something about it felt wrong. The grass bent in a smooth arc, as if something had glided rather than walked. Every instinct told them to turn back, but the thought of the pregnant mare pacing her stall with that strange urgency kept them from retreating. She had sensed this path before they found it. Whatever waited ahead had already touched her life. Walking away no longer felt like an option. The handler led the way, stepping over the first patch of flattened grass. His boots pressed softly into the ground and the other workers followed. A soft breeze brushed past them, carrying the faint scent of earth and dry leaves. The deeper they walked, the dimmer the light became. The trees thickened, closing out the sky in places. None of them spoke. It was the kind of silence that made a man aware of every breath he took. The trail wound deeper until it split into two narrow paths. The first curved sharply toward a cluster of rocks. The second stretched forward through a thinning of trees where faint marks clung to the bark. Scratches, fresh ones, as if something with weight had brushed against each trunk. The handler knelt and examined the soil. His brow furrowed. The prints weren't shaped like hooves or paws. They weren't clear enough to identify. Yet they carried a rhythm that suggested movement, almost like something had been circling the area again and again. When he rose, he noticed the others studying the trees with tense looks. Something had been watching the ranch, and not from a distance. They followed the straight path. It guided them toward a dip in the land where the trees gave way to a quiet clearing. The clearing was small, maybe 50 steps across, and at its center lay something unexpected. A shallow hollow had been dug into the soft earth, not wide, but deep. The workers exchanged uneasy glances. Whatever created it had done so deliberately. The dirt around the edges had been smoothed down by repeated visits. One man whispered that it looked like the beginning of a shelter. Another wondered aloud if an injured animal had been hiding there, but the handler shook his head quietly. The hollow wasn't shaped like a resting spot. It looked more like something intended to conceal, something hidden away from sight. Before they could investigate further, a sharp crack echoed from the far side of the clearing. All of them froze. The sound came from just beyond the trees. A snapped branch, heavy and sudden. The handler raised a hand, urging them to stay silent. The men listened carefully. They could hear something moving. Not rushing, not charging. Just moving with intention. When the sound stopped, one of the workers stepped back. His face had gone pale. He whispered that he had seen a shadow, tall, too tall to belong to any animal in the area. The others squinted in the direction he pointed, but the trees hid everything. The handler motioned for them to leave the clearing. They backed out slowly until they were far enough to breathe normally again. No one dared to look back. By the time they returned to the ranch, the sun had dipped low, and every man looked over his shoulder as if expecting the shadow to follow. The mare felt their unease the moment they approached her stall. She lifted her head, ears sharp, and stepped forward. Her sides rose and fell quickly. Her eyes followed each of them, searching their faces as if she knew they had seen something connected to her fears. The handler stood quietly beside her, rubbing her neck to calm her. The ranch owner called a meeting that evening. The workers gathered near the feed shed while the sun slipped beneath the horizon. The owner wanted to know what they had found, and each man shared his piece of the story. When they described the hollow in the clearing, the owner grew troubled. He admitted something he had kept to himself since the mare arrived. The caravan that delivered her had traveled through towns where strange reports circulated. People claimed a tall figure had been seen near the edge of their settlements, sometimes alone, sometimes following their animals at a distance. No one ever caught it. No one knew if it was a person or something else. The caravan never admitted seeing it, but they had always grown restless when the topic was raised. The workers exchanged uneasy glances. They were no longer dealing with random escapes. Something had drawn the mare to that clearing. Something connected to the shadow the other worker had seen. And whatever created that hollow had been patient? Over the next days, the ranch operated under a thick cloud of tension. The mare grew more restless. She pawed her stall floor. She paced whenever footsteps approached the barn. She turned sharply at every sound outside. One morning, she even refused water until the handler led her out to breathe the open air. Her body carried the weight of her unborn foal, yet she acted like a horse with a mission. The handler spent more time with her, hoping to understand her behavior. He noticed she often lifted her nose to the breeze, sniffing intently as though searching for a familiar scent. He understood then that her escapes were not random flights. They were responses. Something had communicated with her in a way humans could not detect. The ranch owner grew impatient. He instructed the workers to set up lanterns around the property at night. He also asked 2 men to stay on watch near the barn. Something had to be done to stop the mare from escaping again, especially in her condition. Yet none of them could shake the sense that keeping her confined might be pushing against forces they didn't fully understand. One night, during the second hour of the watch, the stillness broke again. The guard nearest the barn heard soft crunching in the distance. Not the kind of sound made by a horse or a wandering deer. Something walked slowly, deliberately, as if tracing the same path as before. The guard raised the lantern, squinting into the darkness. For a moment, he saw nothing. Then a faint movement caught his eye near the fence line. A tall shape, barely visible, stood at the edge of the property. He couldn't tell if it was a man. The figure lingered only a moment before stepping back into the shadows. The mare reacted instantly. She reared inside her stall, slamming her hooves against the wood. The handlers rushed in, trying to calm her. She kept swinging her head toward the barn entrance. Her breathing grew intense, almost panicked. It was as if she knew who was outside. Or what was outside? When dawn arrived, the ranch owner realized things were escalating. He sent the handler to speak with a nearby trader who had once crossed paths with the caravan. The trader lived several miles away, near a quiet stretch of land with scattered farms. The handler rode out alone, hoping for answers. The ride took longer than expected, and he found the trader tending to a wagon wheel. The man looked older than he remembered, with a face weathered by travel and stories he never shared. When the handler explained the situation, the trader hesitated. He shifted his weight and looked toward the open fields before speaking. He said the caravan that once owned the mare had carried more than goods. They had transported things that didn't belong to them. They traveled through regions where old stories lingered about spirits drawn to certain animals. The trader didn't claim to believe the stories, but he had seen enough signs to keep his distance. The mare, he said, had always seemed to sense things before they happened. She had reacted to unseen presences long before she reached the ranch. The handler felt a heavy pit settle in his stomach. The trader continued. He believed the mare wasn't running from something. She was returning to something she had been separated from, something she wasn't meant to lose. The handler asked him what that meant, but the trader shook his head. He said only this: whatever was seeking her had been searching for a long time, and now it had found her trail. When the handler rode back to the ranch, clouds gathered overhead. The mare stood anxiously at the gate, watching the horizon, waiting for him. Her hooves shifted in the dirt. Her eyes held a determination he had never seen before. The other workers gathered nearby, sensing something building in the air. The ranch felt like a place holding its breath. No one knew how much time they had left before the presence in the trees returned. No one understood what it wanted. But one thing had become painfully clear. The mare was at the heart of it, and whatever truth lay hidden behind her past was beginning to surface. But the land was not finished revealing its secrets, and the shadow was not done visiting. The wind pressed hard against the barn walls that night, carrying with it a strange heaviness that made every small sound feel larger than it should be. The lantern hanging by the door flickered as if unsure it wanted to stay lit. Inside, the men stood in a tight circle, each one wearing the same uneasy look. The mare had slipped away once more, even though they had strengthened the gate, added a new lock, and checked the fence line twice before sundown. She was pregnant and due in just a few weeks, and no one could understand how she kept slipping out with such quiet skill. Every time she vanished, she returned with dust covering her legs and a look in her eyes that none of them could quite explain. It was not fear. It was not panic. It was something deeper. One of the ranch hands insisted they should not wait until morning. He said they needed to go after her right then, while the moon was still bright enough to follow tracks. Another argued that chasing her in the dark could spook her and cause harm. The ranch owner stood silent, rubbing the back of his neck as he weighed every word. He had raised horses his whole life, and he had never seen a mare behave like this. Her restlessness had started 2 months earlier, long before her belly grew heavy. At first it seemed like simple nervousness brought on by the changing season, but the behavior grew stranger with each passing week. It was almost as if something beyond their understanding was pulling her away from the ranch. Tracks were found the next morning leading north toward the open fields beyond the ridge. The men followed the trail slowly, careful not to disturb anything that might give them clues. The ground was soft from a recent drizzle, and her hoofprints were clear. But halfway across the field, the prints stopped at a patch of dry earth. There were no signs of struggle, no scattered dirt, no broken twigs. It was as if she simply vanished for several steps before the tracks appeared again farther ahead. At first the men whispered among themselves, claiming it must have been the wind or the movement of the cattle from a nearby field that disturbed the soil, but the owner knew better. He crouched low, tracing one faint print with his finger. Horses did not leap like that, not in her state. The mare was found near the old cottonwoods by sunset. She stood there calmly, head lowered as she chewed on dry grass, as if nothing unusual had happened. The men approached her slowly, expecting her to bolt as she had in the past, but she let them come near this time. Her sides rose and fell in a steady rhythm, and she looked completely at peace. Yet when the owner stroked her neck, he felt the heat beneath her coat, more warmth than a horse should carry after an easy day. Something was driving her out there, something was exhausting her, and something was unsettling her in ways that none of them could explain. That night they moved her into the smaller enclosure near the house. It was stronger and easier to watch. 2 men stayed on guard, taking turns through the night while the others slept. At dawn, the guard on duty shouted for help. The owner rushed outside, heart pounding, and saw the empty enclosure. The gate stood wide open, the latch untouched. The mare had vanished again, but this time there were no tracks leading out. The dirt around the enclosure was smooth. The men looked at each other with the same troubled stare, each wondering what they were dealing with. They found her before noon near the far side of the property. She was lying on her side, breathing heavy but calm. One of the men knelt beside her and checked her legs for injuries. There were no cuts or swelling. It was as if she had been running for miles, yet her body held no signs of strain. The owner placed a hand on her muzzle, feeling the warm breath against his palm. She opened her eyes slowly and looked at him with a softness that felt almost apologetic. He felt a tightness in his chest then, as if she were trying to tell him something he could not understand. They carefully guided her back toward the ranch, but she stopped twice along the way, staring out across the fields as if searching for something. Each time she would linger, listening to the wind, her ears tilting back and forth. Only when the owner called her softly did she start walking again. Rumors soon began swirling among the workers and neighbors. Some said she was sensing danger, maybe from a predator creeping around the property. Others whispered that animals sometimes sensed things people could not, like distant storms or shifts in the earth. None of these ideas satisfied the owner. Something about her behavior felt deliberate. It was not the frantic scrambling of an animal trying to escape fear. It was purposeful, almost guided. The owner decided to observe her more closely. He kept her in the pasture nearest to his home so he could watch from his window. He noticed she paced often, tracing the same path near the fence line. Her ears stayed alert, her neck stretched forward, and her body carried a tension that never fully relaxed. At night, she would stare out into the distance as though waiting for something to appear. The next morning brought a surprise. A young worker ran toward the house calling for the owner. When they reached the pasture, they found a patch of earth near the fence dug up. Not deep, but enough to look like something had been buried there once. The mare stood beside it, her hooves covered in dirt. When the owner walked closer, she lowered her head toward the disturbed soil. The worker looked uneasy, stepping back as if expecting something to rise from the ground. The owner knelt and brushed some dirt aside. There was nothing there, just empty earth. But the mare stayed focused on it, tense and unblinking. Later that day, the owner walked the fence line alone. The sky was turning a soft shade of amber, and long shadows stretched across the fields. The stillness around him felt heavier than usual. As he neared the cottonwoods, he noticed something strange. Deep within the grass lay several small stones arranged in a tight circle. They were smooth, worn by time, and nothing like the stones scattered naturally across the land. Someone had placed them there intentionally. The owner crouched, studying them. They formed a perfect ring, almost too perfect. Suddenly he remembered the mare's pacing, her staring toward this very part of the land every night. He remembered how she lingered near the cottonwoods each time they found her. Something about this area drew her again and again. He returned to the ranch with a heavy feeling building inside him. When he reached the barn, he found the mare restless once more, moving in slow circles as if preparing herself for another escape. He stepped inside her enclosure, speaking to her softly, promising he would figure out what was troubling her. She stopped pacing and pressed her head lightly against his chest. The warmth of her breath eased him, but at the same time deepened the weight of responsibility he felt. That night he stayed awake, watching her from the window. The moon cast a pale glow over the pasture, painting long, soft shadows. The mare stood still for a long while, staring toward the cottonwoods again. Then, in one slow movement, she lifted her head high and let out a low sound, not quite a call, not quite a cry. It was something filled with emotion he could not name. He rushed outside, fearing she was about to flee again. But when he reached the enclosure, he froze. The mare stood tall, ears pointed, gaze fixed on the horizon. And out beyond the fields, near the cottonwoods, a faint light flickered. Not the shine of a lantern, not the glow of the moon. Something softer yet strangely calling. The owner felt his breath catch. The mare lowered her head and pawed gently at the ground as if urging him to follow her gaze, to finally see what she had sensed for weeks. He stepped closer to the fence, unable to look away from that distant glow. The wind shifted, carrying with it a low hum that brushed past him like a whisper. And in that moment he realized the mare had not been running from something. She had been running toward something. Something that was waiting for them out there. The owner stood at the fence, staring at the soft glow beyond the cottonwoods, unsure whether his mind was playing tricks on him after so many restless nights. The mare let out a quiet sound, almost like she was urging him to pay attention. Her eyes did not leave the distant light. He could feel it in his chest that this moment mattered, that whatever answer had been hidden from them all this time was finally within reach. The air had a stillness that made every breath feel louder, as though the earth itself waited for his next step. He opened the gate slowly and walked toward her. She didn't try to escape this time. Instead, she walked beside him as calmly as if they were heading to a familiar pasture. Her steps were steady, her breathing smooth, and for the first time in weeks, there was no tension running through her body. The glow ahead shimmered softly, guiding them like a lantern held by invisible hands. The owner felt a strange mix of fear and relief. Whatever had been pulling her away from the ranch was right there, and he would finally understand what she had been trying to show him. They passed the cottonwoods, and the grass rustled under their feet. The mare stopped near the patch where the stones were arranged in a circle. The light flickered just beyond them, resting low to the ground. The owner took a slow breath and stepped closer. What he saw made his heart tighten. Lying near the base of a small fallen log was a foal. It was thin, weak, and covered in dust, but alive. Its eyes blinked faintly in the moonlight. The mare stepped forward with a soft sound that carried more emotion than any human voice could. She moved with care, lowering her head toward the newborn, nuzzling it gently as if apologizing for every moment she had been kept away from it. The owner stood frozen. He understood now. She had not been escaping at random. She had been coming here every time because she had sensed the foal was alive. He had thought she was pregnant, but he realized she must have delivered without anyone noticing, long before the signs became clear. Perhaps the birth had happened during one of the earlier disappearances, hidden deep in the brush near this spot. The foal must have been struggling, too weak to move, surviving only because the mare had been sneaking away to nurse and care for it as best she could. He dropped to his knees, overwhelmed by the truth. He had misread every sign, every escape. While the men talked about danger or storms or predators, she had been fighting for her young one. She had dug the earth near the fence to signal something was missing. She had stared toward the cottonwoods each night because her heart was split between the ranch and her foal stranded in the wild. She had risked everything to keep it alive, even when exhaustion pulled at every muscle in her body. The foal let out a weak sound as the mare nudged it again. The owner reached out slowly, wanting to help but afraid to break the fragile trust that had formed between them. The mare looked at him, her dark eyes calm and knowing. She stepped aside just far enough to let him near the foal. He checked its breathing, felt its heartbeat, and saw that, although the little one was frail, it still had strength left. The mare had kept it alive longer than anyone could have expected. He understood then what had to be done. Gently, he lifted the foal into his arms. The mare stayed close, her shoulder brushing against him as they walked back toward the ranch. The journey was slow. The foal was light but weak, and he wanted to keep every movement steady. The mare touched her nose to the foal often, reassuring it, guiding it, reminding it she was there. The glow that had guided them faded as they walked away, leaving only the pale moonlight to light the fields. The men at the ranch rushed out when they saw him carrying something. He waved for them to be calm. They stepped aside as the mare followed him into the barn. The owner found a warm corner lined with fresh hay and laid the foal down gently. The mare settled beside it, curling her body around her young one in a protective shield. The workers watched in silence. Not one dared to speak until the owner finally told them everything he had discovered. The story spread through the ranch by morning. Every person who heard it felt the same mixture of awe and guilt. They had all tried to keep her from escaping, not realizing she was fighting for something more important than any gate or fence. They had misunderstood her fearlessness, her determination, and her heart. It made them see her differently. She was not just another horse. She was a mother who had done everything she could for her foal, even when no one believed her. The owner stayed by her side for hours, offering water, warm cloths, and whatever he could to help both her and the foal recover. The workers moved quietly, bringing supplies without needing to be asked. The ranch felt different that day, filled with a quiet respect. Life moved with a softer rhythm, as though the land itself recognized what the mare had accomplished. The foal grew stronger over the next few days. Each morning, the owner saw more brightness in its eyes, more steadiness in its legs. When it finally stood for the first time, wobbling but determined, the entire barn seemed to breathe out at once. The mare watched proudly, nudging it forward each time it stumbled. She had fought so hard for this moment, and now she could rest in the comfort of the ranch she trusted again. Neighbors who heard the story visited to see the foal. They brought carrots, warm blankets, and gentle words. No one looked at the mare with judgment anymore. Instead, they saw her as a symbol of resilience and devotion. People whispered about how she had sensed her foal in danger, how she refused to be kept away, and how she risked her safety to keep it alive. Her story spread beyond the ranch, touching many hearts and reminding them how powerful a bond can be. As the weeks passed, the fields returned to their familiar rhythm. The foal grew steady on its legs, darting around the pasture with bursts of energy while the mare watched with calm pride. The owner often stood by the fence, remembering those nights when he thought she was running out of fear. Now he knew she had been running toward hope. That understanding changed something in him. He learned that animals had a language deeper than words, and sometimes all they needed was someone willing to listen. He made it a habit to walk with the mare in the evenings, letting the quiet settle around them as the sun dipped low. She no longer stared toward the cottonwoods with worry. Instead, she watched her foal, knowing the ranch was now a safe place again. The owner would follow her gaze and feel content, grateful for what she had taught him. In time, he placed a small marker near the cottonwoods where he had found the foal. It was simple, made of wood, carved only with a small pattern that matched the stones he had found in a circle. It served as a reminder of the journey they had all taken, the mystery they had carried, and the truth that had changed everything. People continued to visit not because they wanted to witness drama or fear, but because they wanted to feel the quiet strength that lived at the ranch now. They wanted to see the mare who had challenged every obstacle and the foal she had saved. They wanted to stand in the field and feel that sense of connection that had surprised so many. The owner often found himself telling the story to new faces. He told it simply without embellishment because the truth was enough. He spoke about the mare's determination, the strange disappearances, the restless nights, and the moment when everything finally made sense. Each time he finished the story, people looked at the mare with a kind of respect that could not be faked. As the seasons shifted, the foal grew into a strong young horse, playful and confident. The bond between mother and child never faded. They moved together with a grace that reminded everyone watching how powerful dedication and instinct could be. The owner kept the ranch running with a renewed sense of purpose. He worked with more understanding, more patience, and more awareness of what his animals tried to communicate. The mare had changed the way he saw everything. Years later, when people spoke of the ranch, they often mentioned the mare who escaped again and again for a reason no one understood at first. They talked about how the mystery revealed a truth that touched their hearts. And they spoke of the foal who grew strong because its mother never gave up. The story stayed alive in every corner of the ranch. It became a reminder that sometimes the most incredible moments come not from dramatic storms or wild events, but from the quiet persistence of a heart that refuses to give up. In the end, the mare's journey showed everyone that love, instinct, and determination can overcome anything. It left the ranch with a legacy that would never fade, a legacy built not on fear, but on hope and the unwavering strength of a mother who followed her heart no matter the cost.